I just can't let you go. Lord knows that I've tried to. You said I was the only one.
Hey, welcome back to the shop. I'm Jason, and above me I've got my 2002 BMW M5. This is my track rat, autocross toy, plaything, I would call it. The car that everybody says I've ruined. We'll leave it at that. Today I need to do some basic maintenance on it. I need to do a brake flush because, I'll be honest here for just a second, I didn't do one all season last year. Never ran into brake fade, my reservoir didn't change color, everything felt great. So I got a little lazy. I'm hoping that the fluid I pull out is in good condition, and I'm gonna be safe with it this year as well. Along with that, I'm gonna pull all my brakes apart, inspect my pads, inspect my rotors, retorque everything down, and make sure that I'm good for another season. This is not something you would necessarily need to do on your daily driver. However, we're gonna cover a couple of points with the brakes that are common failure points on these cars that might encourage you to take a look at yours. So let's get going on this rather quick project. Now I'm starting with breaking my caliper bolts free while the car is up above my head. Then we'll be lowering it down, pulling the wheels, and getting onto the inspection part of the brakes. All right, so kicking off our brake inspection up front, a few things to look for. You want to make sure you have your spring tension clip and that you also have both of your slide pin covers. Now, you might think that that's not an important piece, but if you don't have these covers on the back of your boots, what's going to happen is your slide pins are going to fill up with debris and grease.
What did you say?
Well, the grease should already be in there. If you don't have these covers, your slide pins are going to fill up with debris. It's going to get stuck in the grease, and it's going to cause your caliper to not be able to slide. These are floating calipers that are sliding as the piston is engaging. If it doesn't slide, it's going to bind and kink, and it's going to either wear one side or the other or wear unevenly, and you're going to have poor braking performance. The next thing that you're going to look at while you're looking at your brakes is just how much pad you have left. You're going to want to have at least 3.5 millimeters as your minimum. Your brake sensor or your brake wear sensor is going to be, depending on the year of your vehicle, either a single stage or a two-stage sensor, and they're going to turn the light on in the car at right around that 3.5, 4, sometimes 3 millimeters inside of the pad wear. That's going to be right when you should be about ready to replace these so that your pads don't overheat, fall apart, and or leave you stranded. So in my case, I've got a ton of pad. I'm going to show you the pads once I get them out here. So I'm going to pull the rest of the caliper bolts off the back. I left them with just 1 or 2 threads to make it easy for me to hold them in place. So you can see what we have here is a completely loaded caliper. I didn't take the spring clip off, I didn't take the slide pins out, and that's because I can just slide it right off of the back like that. There goes one of my pads, there goes my spring clip, and now my caliper is free. I'm gonna set that right here on top of my knuckle so that it's not putting any undue tension on my brake hose, even though I have stainless brake lines. So as you can see, my pads have a ton of life left in them.
So much.
But what I'm gonna do is clean this debris out of my vent channel on both of these, and then clean up the edges, take off these burrs, and make sure that everything is good and clean. I will also wipe down the grease from the outside of the friction edge here, and then we're going to be adding new grease there as well. Now I can go inside and I can inspect the inside of my caliper, make sure that my boot seal looks good, I don't have any moisture built up around it, make sure that my rubber slider or my slide pin holders look good, and we're ready to go here. On my bracket, we're looking at the slide pins to make sure that they don't look damaged, that our bracket itself doesn't look damaged, and we're going to clean this as well so that as everything goes together, there isn't any contamination or anything that is going to inhibit our caliper from sliding and our pads from actuating. All right, we've got everything cleaned up. Now we can go ahead and start reassembling. You can see I pulled my rotor off and I wiped it down with a little bit of brake clean to make sure that anything that I got on there when cleaning the caliper, well, it's not there anymore. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start by prepping our caliper bracket. I'm gonna throw some lithium soap grease on my slides. I'm also going to add a little bit inside the boot here on both of these. Make sure you get your finger all the way in there.
Oh, that tickles. It tickles so much.
Then we're going to throw a little bit of lube on our bracket, some anti-seize. And you can see on the bracket the wear points right there where the pads are making contact. We don't need to put a bunch on here, just a little bit. And then we're going to load our bracket into the caliper. Slide that bad boy back and forth a couple of times. Make sure that that grease is nice and seated on there. Inside pad is the one with the spring. I'm also going to throw just a little bit of anti-seize all the way around on the contact surface here. And then make sure that I don't have anything on my thumb, because my thumb is going to be what presses in the pad into the caliper. Slide it in, make sure that we're getting it in underneath our bracket. And the easiest way to do that is you can slide the bracket out just a little and then listen for the click. Locks right into place. Set our caliper back down so that it can't walk away again. If you do it this way, you got to be really careful with your finish, or your finish will wind up looking like mine and all beat to heck. Now on the contact side of our pad, I'm going to put just a little bit of anti-seize right there. This is where the caliper clamps down right here, and I want it to be able to slide just a little. Make sure that there's no anti-seize on your fingers again before you put your hand on the pad. Anti-seize somehow multiplies.
Now it's everywhere!
Okay, you heard that guy snap into place. Now we'll take our loaded caliper and we're going to slide it over top of our rotor. And then we can get our caliper bolts back in and torque. Now I'm going to be honest, I don't torque these. I give them an appropriate number of ugga-duggas, at least appropriate the way I feel. If you are not a seasoned technician, you should look the torque up and go ahead and torque them. Now we can take our caliper spring, and again on the contact points right here on the front, we're going to put just a little bit of anti-seize, and right here on the inside of the hook lip area where it contacts the front of the caliper, slide it in, and then with your thumbs you can lock it into place. Make sure that it engages on the top and the bottom of the spring. And last thing, we're going to put our slide covers back on so they stay nice and clean. Now there is an upgrade that you can do to these floating calipers, and that would be putting a bronze slide guide in here so that there's no side and forward aft movement of the caliper. All right, quick tangent while I'm on the back side of the car here. Go ahead and pull a rotor if you have a chance and inspect your parking brake linings. Make sure that your retainer at the top, your spring retainers at the side, your spring at the bottom, and your self-adjuster here are all in what look to be good shape. Make sure you don't see any corrosion on the adjuster. Put a screwdriver on there, see if you can rotate it. The last thing you want is for your rear parking brake assembly to delaminate and come apart inside. So while you're inspecting your brakes, if you're taking them apart or doing a brake job, now is a great time to inspect all of these surfaces. Likewise, you can inspect the surface of your hub bore here and make sure that everything else looks to be in good shape. All right, moving on to our brake flush. One of the things that I like to do is I like to pull the fluid out of the reservoir and fill it back up before pushing the fluid down through the system. That way we're not just dragging the old fluid through all of our lines. You can go about this in a number of different ways. For many years, I used a turkey baster.
Commemorative turkey basters.
That works just fine. Another way that you could do it is pull your fill cover off. Make sure you throw a rag in here so that you're not dripping brake fluid everywhere. And then I'm going to use a pump / extractor with a nice small hose to get down in there and get as much out as I can with the filter still in there. You can see the fluid coming out of the line is really clear. My reservoir isn't discolored. Let's see. We're going to get to the bottom of this filter pretty quickly. You can hear it starting to bubble. Then what I like to do is grab this filter with a pair of channel locks, and it'll pop up out the top like that. Squeeze it out. There we go. And then you can check inside, make sure there isn't any debris or anything. Set that on your little cover. Stick your head down in there and get a good visual of what's going on. Now we can get our extractor hose further in to get even more of the fluid out. All right, and I can see we're nice and empty now. So our next step is to fill the reservoir back up. For this, I'm using Prestone .4, and we're going to be doing a one-man brake flush, or woman, whatever you want to say. And what I mean by that is we're not going to need somebody to pump the pedal and open the caliper up, and then pump the pedal and then open the caliper up. We're going to be applying pressure from the reservoir here with a pumping system. We're going to wind up using 2 of these 12-ounce bottles. There we go. Full right up to the top. Another drip in there. So you'll need to get one of these caps for a pressurizing tool. This one is 25 years old now, but still does the same job. It's just aluminum screw-on cap with an air chuck. And then I use the Motive Products Power Bleeder. If you were going to be bleeding lots and lots of vehicles, you'd buy your brake fluid 1 gallon at a time and you'd fill this up. We're just going to use it to push air instead of fluid through the system. So we've got our little gauge here on the front so that we can see how much pressure we're putting in here. You're going to have to pump quite a bit because air compresses and hydraulic fluid doesn't. So I'm going to put 12 to 15 psi in here. Then we'll put the car back up in the air. And we're going to be starting on the right rear wheel, then the left rear, then the right front, and then the left front. That's going to get the longest line to the shortest line around the car. Okay, we've got just under 15 psi in the system here. And by doing it this way, you do want to make sure you don't take out too much fluid, because you can pump air through the system. The safest way to do it is to put brake fluid in here, pump it through, and then you'll push fresh brake fluid into the system. Starting at the right rear, what I'm using for a receptacle is an old Smart water bottle with a vacuum line through the top. That way I can see what's coming into the bottle. You can see there's some old fluid in there, with a little bungee cord that I can just hang up. They make lots of systems that you can buy, but this was free. I had the vacuum line and the other stuff. So throw your vacuum line over your bleeder port, And then we're going to be using a 9mm, and we're going to crack that open, and we should see fluid start to come out of here pretty quickly. Now, I did expand all of the brakes, so it's going to take a hot second for everything to compress, and then you'll see fluid start to come into the reservoir. I can already see just a little bit of fluid down in there. And you don't have to worry about air going back into the system because we're under pressure right now, so air shouldn't be going backwards. Now, we just wait for this to start to fill up, and we want to make sure that in our 30-ounce bottle here, we only fill up about 1/3 of it, which is going to be our 12 ounces or so from our new brake fluid. Now, one thing I'd recommend is having a towel handy. I have had these the vacuum lines pop off, fluid go all over and it's swinging, or I've had bottles fall, all sorts of different things. And brake fluid is caustic, melts paint, it's not very nice on stuff, so you want to be ready to clean that up. See, this one is draining nice clean fluid as well. So it looks like I was able to make it through that season without burning my fluid and discoloring it too bad. I'll probably make it through another. Your bleeder screw just needs to be snug. You're just cinching it down and stopping the fluid flow. It's not going to open itself up. Now all that air, that's because there was air in the vacuum line. You can see that air eventually stops once the vacuum line is empty, and we'll start pumping fluid out of here. So if you watch carefully, you'll see the fluid level rising very carefully. And again, if you haven't done this, each time you open this guy up, it's going to go and blurt out a bunch of debris that was stuck back here in the caliper housing. All right, more air poofing out. Again, that's just in the vacuum line. You can see when that air stops, and then you're just getting fluid out. Now, I do think that when we do the clutch line, it's probably going to be pretty dirty. The clutch fluid tends to not circulate, or not the clutch fluid, but the fluid in the clutch line tends to not circulate quite as well as the brake fluid does. All right, our clutch bleed is the same as the rest of the system, except it's a 7mm, and you got to get past this splash panel here. So we're gonna hook our tank up, reach up and around the splash panel, and then we're gonna get this guy bled. So we got to get up and around. And sometimes these 7s are a little difficult, so you may want to put the box wrench on it. This one opened up nicely, mainly because I don't over torque it every time I bleed it. So I can see that air coming through the line. Eventually that air will stop, and then we'll get our fluid coming out. The clutches can be troublesome. I have pressure bled lots of these and then found that the clutch wants to collapse or there's air in there. But it's always hit or miss whether or not that's going to be the case. There we go. I can see little bits of cloudy fluid coming out, but nothing too dark. Oh, there went air.
Okay, that's it. I'm out.
Well, poo. Either... You know what happened? Because I didn't fill the reservoir up, remember we talked about this, you might push air through. I got too much fluid on there, and the reservoir in the back for the clutch is much smaller. So we're gonna lower it down, put fluid in it, and see if we can't do this again. Learn from my mistakes. Don't do what I do. Yep, I'm over here jabbering away. I can see the fluid level right there, just below the hose, which means I introduced a ton of air. Whoops. All right, so what are we gonna learn from this experience? Well, you know that meme of every job is one broken bolt away from being a week-long enterprise?
That's messed up.
Well, this is just like that. This could have happened because maybe you had an extra beer during the job.
A complimentary bucket of Coronas?
Or maybe you were chatting with your buddy and
You talk, yap, yap.
the topic got kind of fun and you totally forgot that that bleeder was open. Or, man, back when I was in the dealer, I did this. I've seen other people do it. We'd put a 2-gallon bleeder up there, and then parts counter would call and they would tell you that you have a problem and you have to come to the counter and get a different part or order it, or they don't know what they're looking for, and you're like, crap! And you run back there to the counter and you're trying to fix it and you go, holy moly, I left the bleeder on. You come back and there's fluid going everywhere because your bottle filled up and it's just flushing out the bottom, and you had 2 gallons pumping up through there. Anything could happen. Now we're just gonna go ahead and fix it. There's that air. There's more air. Chug, 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 chug. All right, that was quick. The air's out. So I'll go ahead and close the bleeder. I can see it moved. I marked my bottle that much. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pump the heck out of the clutch, and then I'm gonna come back again and give her one more bleed to make sure that all the air is out of there. It should be good this time doing the power bleed. So here's what I did to get the air out. The clutch did fill up with air. That's because it uses this small little portion of the reservoir back here. In the process of bleeding it, I let that little section go dry. My mistake. If you've got a story from the shop, something that you've done, let everybody else know that this is real life. It happens. What have you done that was crazy? Was it draining the oil into a pan that was too full and it overflowed? Brake flush, coolant fill, something like that. I'm sure there's some pretty cool stories out there. So anyways, I filled the reservoir back up. I pumped through the air from the cylinder, opened the reservoir again, filled it back up, and then my clutch pedal was still completely dead. So I pumped it 1,000 times. Probably shouldn't do that on camera. I pumped it 1,000 times.
Man, whoa, let's keep it PG.
Till the pedal came back. Now I've got full pedal. I bled it again, and there was just a tiny bit of air. Now my pedal feels great, back to normal. Easy fix. It was also something really easy to happen. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm gonna get this thing put back together. I had to take a couple day break to manage my teenagers and homeschool and, you know, just plain do life. Then I'm gonna get this thing out here in Mexico and do a little bit of test driving. You know what that means. What I need you to do is I need you to drop down, hit that like button, comment. If you have something good to say, cool. If you have something bad to say, keep it to yourself. Or put it in the comments. We'll see what you have to say. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, I don't know, stuff like this. We'll see you in the next one.